They say the most dangerous predators don't look like monsters. They look like the person sitting across from you at dinner. Maybe that's why so many of these stories seem to start in places like this. Empty diners, dimly lit booths. Places where we let our guard down just enough to let the wrong person in. Tonight, we're looking at what happens when that trust is exploited. Thank you to J Nightmares for sourcing and translating some of these deranged stories from Japanese. I'll link his channel in the video description. Here goes. This happened one afternoon while I was out shopping in town. Just a normal day. I was walking through the parking lot with my bags in hand when someone called out to me. Excuse me, could you give me a ride home? I turned around and saw a young woman standing there, and to my surprise, she was stunning. The kind of beauty that made you second guess whether this was really happening to you. She looked at me, a little sheepishly, and said, I lost my wallet, and I don't have any way to get home. She told me her name, and from what I gathered, she lived alone. No car, no friends nearby, and her place was apparently quite far on foot. She tried contacting a few people, but no one had picked up or offered to come help. With the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, the shadows stretching longer across the street, she'd gotten desperate enough to approach a stranger. Me. She looked genuinely distressed. And I mean, what kind of person would just leave someone stranded like that? Especially a young woman with no way home. It felt wrong to just walk away, so I told her, yeah, I can drive you. I figured if I were in that position, I'd want someone to help me too. As we drove through the narrowing back roads, the sky started darkening and we made idle conversation, harmless stuff. So, why'd you choose me to ask? I asked with a bit of a nervous laugh, half joking. She smiled, a little bashfully. You seemed kind, and I kinda thought you were cute. That caught me off guard. I mean, what guy wouldn't feel flattered? The more we talked, the more suggestive she became. She wasn't being overly forward, but her tone and the way she looked at me, it was playful, even a little seductive. Honestly, I started feeling pretty lucky. I mean, what were the chances? A beautiful girl, a chance encounter, and now we were talking like we'd known each other longer than 20 minutes. Before I knew it, we pulled up in front of what she said was her apartment. Then she leaned in slightly and said, Would you like to come up? I want to thank you properly. My heart skipped a beat. Was this really happening? This kind of thing only happens in shady internet stories or cheap drama plots, right? I told myself, don't be an idiot. But my body had already betrayed me. My pulse was racing, and I felt this hot rush of excitement. If this was a dream, I didn't want to wake up. I nodded. Sure. She opened the door and led me in. This way, she said, gesturing inside. But the moment I stepped into the apartment, something felt wrong. It was empty. Not like tidy empty, no. Vacant. There was no furniture, no scent of someone living there, no shoes by the door, no lights on. Just cold silence and an unsettling stillness. It didn't even look like anyone had ever lived there. What is this place? I muttered, more to myself than to her. Before I could finish processing it, the front door creaked open behind me. 3 men entered, big, rough-looking. The kind of guys whose eyes tell you they've done things most people wouldn't even imagine. One of them had a scar that split his eyebrow. Another one had a face like it had been broken once and never quite healed right. Wallet. One of them barked at me. It wasn't a question. Wait, what? I stammered, stepping back. heart suddenly pounding for an entirely different reason. Another guy stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "You want to hand it over," he said, "or do you want to end up in hospital?" I can't explain it, but the moment he said that, I knew. I just knew these weren't guys who were bluffing. There was a coldness in their eyes, absence even, like they'd done this before, like they wouldn't feel anything if they had to drag me out of there bleeding. These weren't just criminals. These were people who had learned to silence that little voice of conscience a long time ago. And then I noticed it. One of them had his hands resting on his chin. At first, it looked casual, but when I looked closer, I saw it. He was missing a finger, his pinky clean off. That detail, I don't know why, but it chilled me more than anything. Like instinct kicking in, I pulled out my wallet and handed it over. One of them flipped it open and sneered. "No cards." I couldn't speak. I just shook my head slowly, afraid that even my voice might provoke something. "What do you want to do with him?" One asked the others like I was just a thing. The girl I had given a ride home, still standing off to the side like nothing had happened, finally rolled her eyes and said, "Whatever, let him go." They pulled out the bills, tossed the wallet down at my feet like it was garbage, and walked out, tutting at me as they passed me. Just like that. For a while, I couldn't move. I was frozen, limbs heavy, lungs tight. My legs buckled a little before I caught myself. And then, my whole body started shaking, uncontrollably. I'd always thought that kind of reaction only happened in movies. But no, when fear really settles in, when you feel how close you just came to being gone, your body just stops listening to you. It was like I was looking down at myself from the outside. Eventually, I stumbled out of that place and drove straight to the nearest police station. I told them everything, every last detail. One officer pulled out a file and said, "Would it happen to be these people?" He showed me 4 photographs. It was them. All 4 of them, including the girl. They'd done it before. And suddenly it clicked. That feeling of being targeted, not randomly, deliberately. People like them, they prey on kindness. They wait for someone decent to walk by, someone too nice to say no. Looking back, it's obvious. If you really lose your wallet, you go to the police. You ask a store clerk, not a stranger in a parking lot. And if you're a woman, asking a random man for a ride home, then inviting him up to your place, it doesn't add up. I was a fool, and I was lucky. They could have done worse, a lot worse. They didn't, and that fact, that I got off with just some cash taken, still haunts me. Like it was a test, like next time, I might not be so lucky. Now I think of it like tuition, a payment I made to learn something I will never forget. I was in my early 20s, maybe 22 or 23, and I'd been dating this guy for a few months. We were still in that early stage where you're figuring each other out. When you think you know the person, but really you don't. One night, we were hanging out at his apartment, just the 2 of us, when out of nowhere, he looked at me seriously and said, "Be honest with me. Have you ever been in an adult video?" I blinked, stunned. What? No, of course not. But he didn't seem convinced. He got up, pulled out a DVD, and shoved it into the player. "You need to see this," he said. On screen is probably exactly what you imagine an adult film to look like. He wanted me to pay attention to the female actress. Her body shape was kind of similar to mine, I guess. But the face, the eyes were different. Her cheekbones were shaped differently. Honestly, the resemblance was so vague I wouldn't have even thought of it myself. Okay, before we even get into anything else, she doesn't look like me, I said plainly. He didn't back down. Well, my friend said it's within the range of what could change from plastic surgery. The friend he was talking about was someone I knew. I'd met him once at a small get-together a few weeks prior. Nothing special. I barely remembered the guy. Apparently, he was the one who started this whole thing. Hey, your girlfriend's in adult entertainment. I swear I've seen her. Then he gave my boyfriend that video and started feeding him garbage like, the face is different 'cause she got work done. She changed her name and went underground. And instead of laughing it off as ridiculous, my boyfriend believed it. I was beyond disgusted, not just because he showed me the video, but because of the way he looked at me, like I was lying, like he thought I was capable of hiding something like that. I stood up, heart pounding in frustration. You know what? I'm leaving. Don't contact me for a while. I turned toward the door, but before I could reach it, he suddenly grabbed me. He suddenly blocked my way and started pulling at my clothes. I want to check. In the light. I need to compare. Just like that, his voice wasn't playful. It wasn't a joke. He actually wanted me to undress. I screamed. It wasn't even fear yet, just pure reflex. I grabbed whatever I could, books, a lamp, I think even a cushion, and threw them at him. I threw everything, anything, just to make space, just to get out. I stormed off for the door, yanked it open, and ran into the hallway. As I staggered out, dazed and terrified, the door across the hall cracked open. A woman, maybe in her 30s, peeked out, probably startled by the noise. I locked eyes with her and shouted, "Please help me." She didn't hesitate. She pulled me into her apartment and locked the door behind me. She calmed me down, offered me water, and even insisted on walking me to the train station herself. "Do you want to go to the police?" she asked gently as we stood outside. I wanted to. God, I really did. But at the time, I was working in this extremely uptight government office. Super conservative. I knew, even as the victim, this kind of story would spread like wildfire. Did you hear about the girl from the office? Her boyfriend said she was working in the adult industry. I couldn't risk it. I didn't want to become that story, so I just shook my head and thanked her. I cut all contact with him after that, blocked him everywhere. But later, through a mutual friend, he passed along a message. Turns out that I might have been wrong about that actress. She works with another label now. I guess I was wrong about you. Sorry. I didn't respond. In my head, all I could think was, I don't care, you idiot. But I did respond in another way. I told every single one of our mutual friends what had happened. All of it. I asked them to never give him my number again, never to pass along any messages, and to pretend I didn't exist if he ever talked about me. A while later, I heard something. Apparently, that same guy, my ex, had gotten himself into legal trouble. He was posting online about some new girlfriend. He shared everything about her, her real name, contact info, everything. And alongside that, he wrote, "Former adult star," just blasting her name all over the net. She got a lawyer. It blew up into a full-blown legal mess. But me, I didn't care anymore, not one bit. He was someone else's problem now. I've quibbled with the thought of publicly sharing my story for a while now. Recently, I've arrived at a place where I think the benefit of sharing outweighs the risk. People can be so judgmental. So I'm taking a chance and just putting it out there. Maybe it will help someone. Many times, I've looked back on the odd events leading up to the scariest night of my life. October 5th, 2015. I'd like to say that I did everything right, but honestly, in hindsight, I should have done more. I am convinced that my son, who was 3.5 years old at the time, actually saved me from harm that night. I could have easily become another statistic in the crime database. Although my stalker did not hurt me physically, it took me months to get past the psychological damage. Here is my story. In May 2012, I temporarily exited the workforce following the birth of my son, Chris. He was born with a physical birth defect that would require multiple corrective surgeries during his first year of life. He was also born 2.5 months early, which had complicated things further. NICUs are no fun. Chris's father, Aaron, agreed that I should stay home with our son until he was a year old, considering the circumstances. In May 2013, I felt comfortable enough to leave my son with a babysitter, so I went job hunting. I ended up being hired on the spot as a waitress at a small but a very popular chain restaurant in my little town. Let's just say that this diner is widely known for their waffles and leave it at that. I was hired on to work second shift, the newbie shift because it's not as busy. After 2 months, I'd worked my way up to first shift. The breakfast shift is the moneymaker. By the summer of 2014, I'd long built a clientele of regular customers that enjoyed my service and tipped me well enough to put a bit back in savings, which came in handy when Aaron and I broke up. It was not an amicable split at first. I ended up moving out of our apartment with Chris and renting a small 2-bedroom trailer in the same town. It was mid-November of 2014 when I first met Ryan, the man who would later stalk me. It was an abnormally slow Saturday morning shift at the diner. 2 men, one late 40s or early 50s, the other maybe early 20s, walked into the diner together and sat down in my section. They were my only customers at the time, so when the older man of the two started making small talk, I had the time. The older man introduced himself to me as Ryan, and the younger man with him was his son. Right away, by his body language and tone, I could tell Ryan was being flirtatious with me. He even cracked a cliché joke saying, "There's no way you work here because you're too pretty and you have all your teeth." Honestly, I wasn't really amused with that tired kind of humor. I'd heard it over 1,000,000 times by then. I was a little annoyed with being casually hit on by him. I was 25 years old at the time and much closer to his son's age, but nevertheless, I faked merriment because a happy customer equals a better tip. It's just part and parcel to the job. Suffice it to say, my fake laughing and smiling paid off, earning me a $10 tip on a $20 ticket. They were only there for 30 minutes too. Not too bad, I thought to myself. The following weekend, Ryan came back to the diner. This time, and every subsequent time thereafter, he came alone. There was nothing unusual about this interaction than from the last. I took his order, we chit-chatted when I had time. I kept his coffee refilled, and that was it. But apparently, he enjoyed his experience, because again, he left me a nice $12 tip on an $8 ticket. Ryan began visiting the diner every weekend from then on until the end of December. By then, he had started coming 2 to 3 times per week, and at this point, he really started showing an interest in getting to know me. Now, that's not something unusual per se. I had some other regulars that I actually developed friendships with, some even getting me Christmas gifts and such, so I did tell him things about myself in casual conversation during his visits. Just normal things that normal people talk about. One of the things I eventually told him was about the medical miracle that is my son. I even bragged about the fantastic job his doctors did showing him the before and after photos of his surgeries. Over those past several weeks, Ryan's attitude toward me had changed. He was no longer this annoying, flirty, middle-aged guy, but rather a seemingly caring person. Maybe I was naive, but I genuinely appreciated his kindness, and I did not interpret it as a romantic gesture at all. Ryan continued coming by on my shifts for breakfast 3 times a week. February 2015 is when the first strange event occurred, which was soon followed by a string of more. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I picked Chris up from the babysitter and was heading home from work. Now, where I lived was on a small uphill, dead-end road. As you pulled onto my road from the main highway, you could easily see my trailer on the right side at the top of the hill. It was positioned perpendicular to the road, and the backside of it is visible as you drive up the road. As I eased my way up the hill, something immediately caught my eye. I could clearly tell my back door was open. I put the brakes on immediately and tried to figure out what to do. I literally never touched or unlocked that door, much less opened it. So I knew something was off. A door is not going to unlock and open all by itself. I ended up parking my car off to the side of the road and calling Aaron. At this point, we were on good terms and co-parenting our son very well. Aaron came straight over and checked out my trailer while I remained back in my vehicle with Chris. About 5 minutes after entering, he called me and told me it was all clear. Again, small trailer. So I made my way up the hill, expecting to have been robbed or something, but nothing was missing. There was no damage to the door, so Aaron basically brushed things off, saying that I must have forgotten to close the door myself or something. I knew better, but since there was no sign of a B&D, I let it go. 2 days later, on Thursday, I come home from work, and the same thing. My back door is wide open. At this point, I know I'm not crazy. I know I'd locked that damn door. It didn't have a deadbolt, by the way. It just had a lock on the doorknob that you turn. I'd even tested it out that morning before work to make sure it was locked. So, I called Aaron again. I stayed parked with Chris on the side of the road while he did a quick pass through my trailer. And again, nothing out of the ordinary except my open back door. A quick inventory showed that nothing was missing. I was nervous at this point, thinking someone had broken in twice, and Aaron disagreed. He attributed this problem to a faulty doorknob lock, which made no sense to me. He then went to Lowe's and purchased a type of heavy-duty swivel lock to install on the door that locked from the inside of my home. He wanted to put my mind at ease, at least. So while he installed the lock, I combed through my house. I mean, I literally spent hours after Aaron left, inspecting every nook and cranny of my trailer. The outlets, my shower head, vents, my panty drawer, everything. I thought that maybe some freak had broken in and planted secret cameras since they didn't take anything. I didn't find anything amiss, so I begrudgingly let it go. 2 days after that, so on a Saturday afternoon, I'm off work, heading uphill on the road toward my driveway. My son is spending the weekend with his dad, so I have the house to myself that evening. A wave of relief washes over me as I see that my back door is still closed. Now, I don't know why I decided to do this, but something compelled me to actually inspect the door up close. I needed to make sure it wasn't tampered with. To my horror, I discovered that it had. There were pry marks along the edge of the door jamb. I immediately went inside and unlocked the door so I could open it and inspect further. The edge of the door was bent to hell and back on the inside where the doorknob met the jamb. That damage wasn't there 2 days ago when Aaron installed that new lock. I deduced that someone had probably been using the credit card trick or something similar to easily break into that door, since the way it locked was by the knob. And when they figured out that would no longer work, they tried to pry it open, not knowing that a new lock was on the other side of the door. I'm thankful that lock held. At this point, I called the police and made a report. They basically told me there wasn't much they could do in this instance other than document the incident. They told me to call them if anything else happened. Needless to say, that wasn't satisfactory to me, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping at home that night, so I ended up making the hour drive to my parents' house and crashing there. Nothing else happened for a little while. By March, I'd been able to put February's events behind me and feel secure in my home again. I was working and going about life as usual. At this point, Ryan had begun visiting the diner 5 days a week. Oddly enough, he was there each shift that I worked. It became a running joke with the other waitresses, and in fun, they teased me about having a stalker. I would soon find out just how true that actually was, because in April, things got weird. I came home from work one day to find my grass had been mowed. Now, I usually paid a neighbor to do it for me since I didn't have a lawnmower. My yard was small, but maintaining it was a requirement of my lease agreement. My neighbor didn't charge much to mow it, and he needed the extra cash, so it was a win-win. I knew I hadn't asked my neighbor to mow it recently, so I thought it was strange. I asked him if he went ahead and decided to do it anyway, and he said that he hadn't. So then I called my landlord and asked her if she'd mowed my grass for some reason. The lease said if it reaches a certain height, then she would mow it and charge me for it. I knew my grass hadn't been high enough to warrant that, but it was the only plausible explanation. Of course, she said no. She hadn't mowed my grass. I was stumped. I then assumed that an anonymous neighbor must have mowed my grass out of the goodness of their heart. You know, like a pay-it-forward kind of thing. I mean, what else was I to think? All throughout April and the beginning of May, my grass was being anonymously mowed once per week. I know it sounds strange reading it, but at the time, I genuinely thought a neighbor was just doing neighborly things and didn't want to be recognized for it. On May 5th, 2015, Aaron and I decided to take Chris to the zoo. When we got back from the zoo late that afternoon, we discovered that my front door was cracked open. Now, my front door did have a deadbolt, and I must have forgotten to lock it. How stupid of me. You can imagine how upset I was due to my back door being tampered with multiple times back in February. I just didn't understand why this was happening again. Like all the other times, nothing was taken. My belongings seemed untouched. Yes, I was feeling targeted, but I didn't call the police because I felt like I technically had nothing to report. There was nothing stolen or vandalized, just an open front door. So, I let it go again. 2 days later, I would discover the depths of things. May 7th, 2015. It was one of my rare days off. I was at home relaxing when the diner called me. I answered, thinking my boss wanted to have me come into work. It wasn't my boss, but my co-worker, Celia. She stated that someone named Mary came to the diner asking to speak to me. Mary had asked for me by name. Since I wasn't at work that day, Mary left her phone number and requested that I call her as soon as possible. I thanked Celia for relaying the message and ended the call perplexed. I didn't know who Mary was, but out of curiosity, I gave her a call. Mary ended up being Ryan's estranged wife. I didn't even know he was married. She informed me that Ryan had a nervous breakdown while they were arguing earlier. He started raving like a wild man about how Janine is a better girlfriend than she is a wife. He told her that we were in love and that he'd been taking care of me and my Down syndrome son for months. My son doesn't even have Down syndrome, by the way. She initially thought it was all just crazy talk, considering his mental state. He mentioned where I worked. He said we were going to get married. He said that I'd asked him to adopt my son. He said that he was going to run away with me in order to get away from her. He even told her he started visiting me after following me home one day. When he said that, Mary knew that something was very wrong. Ryan had somewhat of a history with mental issues, and Mary was used to him weaponizing things to hurt her feelings during arguments, even if those things are lies. But she said this time was different. She knew he had started frequenting the diner, and red flags went way up for her when he admitted to following someone home. So she decided to call the diner to see if anyone by my name worked there. When Celia confirmed this, Mary perceived the possible danger, and she left me her name and number, requesting a call back. My head was spinning at this point. While things were finally starting to make sense, I was still gobsmacked. At one point in the conversation, Mary mentioned my grass being mowed. Yes, Ryan even flaunted the yard work he did for me in her face. It was all very strange and very surreal. Basically, Ryan had been obsessing over me for months. He became delusional and had created a whole relationship between me and him in his mind. It was all in his head, and obviously, he was the one that was breaking into my home when I was gone. The visits. Why he did it, I still haven't pieced that 100% together. He never took anything. I imagine he was mowing my grass because that was his little way of taking care of me. Anyway, by the end of the call, I decided to go to the police department in person to file a report about Ryan. I thought at the very least this is harassment, and I needed it documented. Maybe I could get a restraining order. Mary offered to provide an official statement to the police as well, to which I thanked her. The police department took our statements, and the harassment complaint was filed. Although I couldn't get a PO based off my statement alone, I had no proof. The officer did assure me that he would personally go talk to Ryan. I then went straight to the diner to inform my boss, Chase, of the situation. Now, Chase took this very seriously. Just that morning, a third shift waitress actually brought up to Chase how a man came into the diner very early, around 4 a.m., and this man was trying to get her to tell him which days I'd be working that week. She told Chase it made her uncomfortable, so when I told Chase about Ryan, he went back and looked at the cameras from that morning, and sure enough, the man that was bothering third shift for information about me was Ryan. So, Chase initiated the process through corporate to get a permanent ban on Ryan from the diner. It was approved at a later date. I was scheduled to work the following day, and I was nervous throughout my entire shift, but thankfully, Ryan didn't show up, nor did he show up the following day or the next day after that. All was quiet at my home as well. The officer showing up at Ryan's house to speak with him must have spooked him enough to stop. Weeks, then months went by. No Ryan in sight. No vandalism at my home. No mysteriously mown grass. Nothing. My life had gone completely back to normal. But things changed again in October. October 5th, 2015. It was around 8 p.m. My son Chris fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. I had dozed off as well, until I heard a few very light knocks at my front door. I then walked to the kitchen and look out the only window that faces my driveway. No cars there except my own. So I figured the light tapping I heard at my door was either just the TV or my half-asleep brain playing tricks on me. I then returned to the couch and started playing a game on my phone. About 5 minutes later, I heard a few light knocks on my door again. This time, I was wide awake, so I knew my brain wasn't playing tricks. So I walked back over to my kitchen window to double-check the driveway to see who was there. Again, my car was the only one in my driveway. Right as I go to close the kitchen window blinds, loud knocking suddenly erupts at my front door. And I mean loud, angry banging. I guess my instincts kicked in, and I sprinted to the couch. I scooped Chris up into my arms and ran down the hallway to his bedroom. I did the only thing I could think of in that fraction of a moment. He was groggy and confused, but he listened to my instructions. Get under your bed, stay under your bed, and don't come out until I tell you to. I then ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife while dialing 911. I actually screamed at the door that I was calling the cops, in hopes that it would scare them away. I positioned myself at the end of the hallway, which connects my son's room to the living room. This way, I'd have a clear view of both the front door in front of me and my son's bedroom doorway behind me. As the operator picked up my call, the banging on my front door was getting even louder. The operator said she was dispatching police right away. She instructed me to stay on the line until they arrived. About 12 minutes into the call, the banging got more violent, rattling pictures off the wall. I thought for sure that they would break my door down at any moment. The operator asked me where I was located in the home, and I told her. She asked me if I could hide somewhere. She told me not to put myself in danger. In that tiny moment, I felt enraged. Hell no, I'm not gonna hide. I'm not taking my eyes off my son's bedroom under any circumstances. Where are the cops? And besides, I lived in a small trailer, and the only hiding place for an adult is my bedroom closet. I'd be found easily. So, I just erupted over the phone. Look, lady, I'm a single mom. I have no man, no gun, and no place to hide. If he breaks this door down, what am I supposed to do? Throw this knife at him? Where are the cops? She assured me again that the cops were on their way and to stay on the line. More banging, but this time it moved to the actual side of the trailer. It sounded like they were taking a baseball bat and beating against the outside of the trailer. At that moment, Chris started shrieking. I ran the few steps over into his room to check on him. The loud commotion had just pushed his fear gauge over the edge. He was screaming and crying incessantly under his bed. I quickly ascertained that he was physically okay, and I returned back to the end of the hallway to check on the front door. After explaining to dispatch that my son was okay, he was just scared, I noticed that the banging had suddenly stopped. I waited another minute or so, trying to listen out for any sign of further escalation, like window breaking. All I could hear were sobs coming from my son's room. All in all, it took the cops 23 minutes to arrive. By then, the perp was long gone. For reference, I live about 10 minutes away from the police station. Dispatch even called it in as an active home invasion. I was livid about the response time. My front door was made out of some type of metal, just a cheap, generic trailer door. It was now covered in dents. There were noticeable scratch marks on the lock, a failed attempt at picking the deadbolt. The siding on the trailer was damaged, where the perp had hit it with something. Given the history, I immediately suspected Ryan was the perp. The police said since I didn't actually see the person, then they couldn't arrest him without an eyewitness. The most they could do was make a report. They did end up canvassing the immediate area in case he was on foot, since I didn't see any vehicle in my driveway prior to this happening. However, there was no sign of him or anyone around and about. I deduced that he had probably parked nearby out of sight. That way, his vehicle wouldn't be spotted or recognized at my home. My home was situated next to a thin patch of woods that has public access roads on the other side. I also am absolutely convinced that Ryan had nefarious plans for me that evening. But when he discovered my son was at home with me, via his terrified shrieking, he bailed. He stopped trying to break into my home the moment my son inadvertently made his presence known. For whatever reason, Ryan always lit up when I talked about my son. He used to initiate conversations about Chris just to watch me dote over him. Looking back, I guess it was his morbid way of bonding with my child. And I think, in his own warped way, he grew to care about him. So when he heard Chris scream, he decided not to follow through with whatever his plan was for me. I ended up taking a few days off work because I was so shaken up. I stayed at my parents' house during that time because I was afraid to go home. My landlord had the damaged door replaced while I was gone. Realizing that I had a job and a life, and that I couldn't stay gone forever, I knew that I had to go home. So, I got a firearm, a small caliber revolver, but it would do the job. And then I went home. I lived in that trailer for another 4 months before I saved up enough money to move. It was totally peaceful during those months, with no further events or altercations, but I just couldn't stand being there anymore. Since then, I have changed jobs, met someone special, gotten engaged, bought a house, and got a dog. No further sign of Ryan anywhere during any of these life changes. It's been nearly 7 years since any sign of him. Ryan seems to have disappeared out of my life in the same manner he first appeared, out of nowhere. And I couldn't be happier that he's gone. Hopefully, it stays that way.
This happened about 7 or 8 years ago. I had just moved from the countryside to Chiba to start university. I was 19 at the time, young, excited, and a little naive. It was my first time living alone. The apartment was a run-down one-room place, one of those 1K units, just a single room, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. Second floor, no elevator. It was cramped, dusty, the walls were thin enough to hear your neighbors fart, but honestly, I kinda liked it. The place, not the sounds. It felt like mine. And after a good few months, I settled in. I got used to campus life. Even got my first boyfriend. Things were good. And then that's when I noticed my neighbor. She was this really pretty woman, probably in her late 20s, early 30s. She looked like the kind of office worker you'd see in a commercial. Always polite, always quiet. But there was one thing about her apartment that stood out. Right next to the front door was a narrow, frosted glass window, about 70 centimeters wide and about 40 centimeters tall, with these vertical bars across it. It was the kind of window that you'd barely notice, unless you looked closely. And she had it completely covered up with flyers, layer after layer, taped across the glass like she didn't want anyone looking in. She had papered over her own windows. I pointed it out to my boyfriend one day and joked, "What's up with that? Think she's hiding a secret or something?" We laughed and we agreed that next time we saw her, we'd ask. And we did. And her answer changed everything. She said, "Oh yeah, well, I actually feel a little bit awkward about this. Sorry, but I guess it would be wrong if I kept this to myself. But some guy's been trying to peek in through that window. He comes in the middle of the night and he puts his face right up against the glass. He doesn't knock, doesn't say a word. He just stares inside." We were completely horrified when we heard that, and I told her, "Look, my boyfriend is around a lot. If anything happens, just bang on the wall or call out and we'll do our best to come over right away." And she smiled and she thanked us. And after about a month, she was gone. No goodbye, no notice. She just vanished, moved out like she was running. And then something horrible began. It started happening to me. One night I was alone lying on my bed, scrolling on my phone, just trying to fall asleep. And that's when I heard something. A sharp metallic tap at the door. It wasn't a knock, it wasn't the doorbell. It sounded like something hard, metal, lightly hitting the door. I froze. Now keep in mind, this was a tiny apartment. If I left the kitchen door open, I could lie on the bed and see the front door without even getting up. So I turned my head, just slightly, and watched as the door handle slowly started to turn. It was one of those horizontal handles you had to push down to open, and it was moving soundlessly downward, like someone knew what kind of noise it would create. My mind went absolutely blank. I just stared, trying to remember. Did I lock it? Please tell me I locked that door. I had. Well, I was sure I had. Still, I needed to do something, so I reached over, grabbed a shoe, and slammed it against the glass sliding door to the kitchen. It made this horrendous bang, and the door handle immediately stopped moving. Then it slowly lifted back into place, silently. And everything went still. I didn't breathe. Honestly, I held my breath. I didn't move. I didn't even want to blink in that moment. I called the police the next day. They said they'd increase patrols and make a note of it, but that was pretty much it. The second time it happened was about a month later. Again, I was alone. This time there was no slow build-up. There was just a bang, like someone was trying to open the door hard. Like they thought it was unlocked and they were trying to force it. I jumped out of bed and I ran as fast as I could to the peephole. I wanted to get a view of whoever was doing this time, and I saw that there was someone standing there, wearing a bucket hat pulled low over their face. Someone was stood there motionless, just standing there, facing my door. I felt my whole body break out in goosebumps, and I backed away slowly, got on the floor, and I tried to keep my breathing as quiet as possible, but it was hard. And with trembling hands, I called the police. You'd think they'd rush over, right? No. They said, "Can you check again? Is the person still out there? Can you describe them?" I really wanted to scream at them. You want me to stick my face near the door again? Are you out of your mind? But seeing little other choice, I did it anyway. And yeah, the bucket hat guy was still there. In the same position, still standing, waiting. I gave a panicked description and asked them to hurry. There was a police box just 5 minutes away, but they said that my area felt under a different jurisdiction, so it took about 40 minutes for someone to arrive. In the meantime, I called my boyfriend, who sprinted from his job and got there before the police did. And when they finally arrived, we told them everything. And my boyfriend, half laughing, half furious, said, "So, if she was dead when you showed up, would that have gotten your attention?" All they said was, "We'll make a note of it. We'll patrol the area more frequently." And that was that. Until the third time. Well, that was different. My boyfriend was actually with me at the time. We were standing in the kitchen, casually washing the dishes and talking, when suddenly a gust of cold air blew into the room. We both involuntarily shivered. It took a second for us to register what it was. Wait, we didn't open a window, did we? We turned to look, and that's when I saw it. A pair of eyes, right there, staring at us through the window, our kitchen window. On the second floor, where there was only a narrow ledge. There was no balcony out there. We just locked eyes, me and the stranger. 10 seconds, maybe? Felt like a year to me, though. I couldn't speak. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. Let me tell you, if that ever happens to you, you'll understand what true fear is. I tapped my boyfriend's shoulder, and I pointed, and I tried to say something, but the fear just locked my voice up. He saw, and he bolted out of that door, sprinting down the stairs. I followed a few seconds behind, but by the time I reached the hallway, I saw him. The guy. He was already on a mountain bike, pedaling away. He'd been prepared. We looked at the window from outside, and one of the metal bars had been broken. The one thing that was supposed to keep people from looking in, and he'd snapped it. And the worst part? Our bathroom was right next to that window. It was an old apartment, and it wasn't exactly a place to get changed other than the bathroom. So every time I stepped out of the shower, I was completely exposed. He'd probably been watching for weeks. We moved out immediately after that. Years passed, and sadly, eventually I broke up with that boyfriend. I graduated, got a job, and life moved on. But one day, not too long ago, I actually bumped into my ex-boyfriend, by chance. We actually had a coffee, caught up, and of course, that weird stalker came up. We laughed about it, and I said stuff like, "Hey, he was probably only watching me after the pretty neighbor moved out." Like it was all some messed up chain reaction. But then my ex suddenly went quiet, and he looked serious, and then he said, "I'm sorry, but there's something I never told you. That night I chased that guy. You know, when he had the bike. I didn't want to scare you, but he had a knife. A long one, like a sashimi knife. I stared at him, opposite the table in the coffee house, and I thought about what could have happened if that door hadn't been locked, if I hadn't hit the glass, if my boyfriend hadn't caught up to him. I thought about it all. That whole area was full of cheap apartments for students, thin doors, no security. Basically, easy targets. Was he a stalker? A pervert? A robber? Or maybe something worse? Something I don't want to mention. I still don't know, but sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about that first sound, that metallic tapping sound, and I wonder, was he tapping the door with that knife my boyfriend saw? Oh, and that building, the one I used to live in, is still there. There's only one thing I can say about the whole thing, and that is, I hope the police did increase their patrols.
The sun will be coming up soon. Thank you for spending this time with me in the diner. What's your favorite diner food? Let me know in the comments. Mine? Pancakes with maple syrup, without a doubt. Your support goes a long way and keeps the light on in this diner. If you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, turn on notifications, and subscribe for more stories like these. You don't want to miss the next episode, a deranged Valentine's special. You can follow the Mr. Revenant podcast on Spotify, where you can listen on the go. If you can't get enough, join the Inner Circle on Patreon for early access on every episode and behind-the-scenes content. And again, a big thanks to J Nightmares for sourcing and translating some of these stories from Japanese and narrating Peeping Tom. I have linked his channel in the video description. Remember to always pick the corner booth and trust your gut. Sweet dreams.